The treachery of demons is nothing compared to the treachery of an angel. Brenna Yovanov. Set in the present day, Charleston, South Carolina is the perfect place for a romantic getaway, especially in the spring and fall when temperatures are moderate. First of all, it has an amazing restaurant scene that can't be compared to any other city in the United States. In addition, palmettos, magnolias, and oaks border the streets with Victorian homes dating back to the early 17th century. History, both good and bad, is in plain sight. Nearby Kiowa Island and Foley Beach make for long walks on the sand as the gentle surf continuously laps the shore. East Bay Street and Murray Boulevard offer great views of the bay. King Street shopping, the downtown market, and the courtyard of the College of Charleston beckon. It's a whole world where visitors get lost in Southern charm. Recently, Ellie Benton immersed herself in Charleston's romantic atmosphere. She grilled a dinner of freshly caught ambergris with just picked radishes and basil, along with southern grits and homemade fresh cookies from a recipe her grandmother passed down to her. Her bacon-wrapped water chestnuts appetizer was almost ready. To top it off, she served a wonderful bottle of 2010 Sauternes Sauvignon Blanc from Dichem of Bordeaux, France, to accompany this dish. For dessert, she had fresh strawberries and cream, which she intended to enjoy in bed with her man after a romantic walk on the beach near the back door of the rented cottage. It was September, the Friday before her 10th wedding anniversary. She knew that her husband Will was organizing an amazing Caribbean cruise trip for them the following week. It was supposed to be a surprise, but she found out about it from his best friend and business partner Corey Parker. The program included at least 2 evening horseback rides on the beach at ports of call, which she knew would lead to outings of a very different kind. The backstory: Will and Corey met in their sophomore year at Duke University, where they were both studying business. They became fast friends and fraternity brothers, joining Sigma Chi. After graduation, they decided to go into business together, a startup tech company that specialized in helping high school students find a college. On average, more than 2.9 million students enroll in colleges and universities across the United States each year. Many of these families have the money to help their children make the best school choice. They broke even in 3 years of operation, and by year 12, the current year, after taxes and expenses, they would each have $250,000. Each year, they learned from market research how to improve their product and optimize services. They were still young and hungry. None of them were driven by money, but once they started making it, they agreed that having it was better than not having it. Although they weren't rich yet, they were on their way to it. Their goal was to buy out a major technology company within the next 3 years and then decide which mountain they wanted to climb next. Will and Ellie met during their sophomore year in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Will and Corey opened their store. Ellie Shriver attended Sweetbriar College, women only, in Sweetbriar, Virginia, 2 hours west of Richmond. She was a member of the equestrian team and majored in equestrian studies. Her dream was to own a stable, or better yet, her own farm. She got her first job out of high school at just such a farm north of Charlotte. She'd met Will when she and Corey led their small group of 6 on an afternoon walk. Neither Will nor Corey knew a damn thing about horses, but decided it would be a fun workday away from the office. Will immediately fell in love with the young woman who was leading their trip. Ellie wasn't dating anyone else and thought Will was cute, friendly, and well-mannered. He managed to get her phone number from one of her coworkers, and he agonizingly waited 3 days before texting her. She was not surprised to hear from him. They both felt some chemistry during the trip, and she agreed to meet him for coffee. 11 months later, they were married and had an amazing honeymoon in September, on horseback, of course, in the Maroon Bells Mountains near Aspen, Colorado. Will didn't allow them to vacation in the great outdoors after the wedding. They took a few day hikes but returned to the St. Regis Hotel each evening for a relaxing evening that included a combination of ice, whirlpools. Corey, on the other hand, was a bit of a womanizer. He wasn't a boor, but he wasn't ready to be someone's Prince Charming just yet. Ellie had set him up with a couple of girlfriends, but after he was done with each of them within a month or two, she decided it would be wise to keep her friends away from him. She didn't dislike Corey, they were friendly, but she didn't like his dating methods, which she considered immature. She expected him to grow out of this pattern of behavior, but he never seemed interested in doing so. Like Will, he was a very handsome guy. 5'5", tall, dark hair, and deep brown eyes, Corey exercised regularly and was in great physical shape. Unlike Will, who was only slightly shorter in stature with blonde hair and blue eyes, Corey enjoyed hunting. He bedded most of the women he dated, but seemed to lose interest after the first conquest. Ellie regularly chided him for this. "Corey, you can't just entertain them and then move on," she exclaimed once when he was particularly annoyed. "Of course I can, Elle," he replied with a look of mock offense. "I never promise love or relationships, and they're all adults. Besides, if I ever meet one like you, I might be tempted to settle down." Turning to Will, he added, "Right, brother?" "Leave me out of it," his friend wisely replied, correctly realizing the look on his wife's face. "I may be ugly, but I'm not a fool." He was neither. He was just trying to avoid a disagreement with his loving wife. Meanwhile, at the ranch recently, and so a week before her husband's unexpected wedding anniversary trip, Ellie was humming happily to herself as she prepared for a very romantic dinner. Footsteps on the walkway. "He's almost here." "You're so freaking amazing, Ellie. I'm loving every minute with you." "Damn you, Corey," she said. "I can't believe it. I love you so much." 9 months ago. Corey felt he was close to his goal of entertaining his business partner's wife. Ellie was mad at Corey most of the time, but he took it as part of the game. Corey would love him and leave him for a month or so. She thought it was selfishness on his part. He just wanted it without any commitment. His behavior infuriated Ellie when she had to comfort one of her friends. For Corey, it was all part of the plan. But much more importantly to Corey, it gave him the opportunity to learn details about Ellie from her friends. He was an expert at getting a woman to trust him and open up. He could safely ask seemingly innocuous questions about her without arousing suspicion. It allowed him to figure out how to slowly lure her into his bed. Corey knew he had to be patient in this endeavor. It would be a long-term approach. In his musings, he genuinely cared for his business partner, Will. They had been friends since college, and their budding business was paying off. He enjoyed working with Will and hoped it would continue for many more years to come. No, for Corey, it was just a challenge, a dance, as he called it. He was convinced that with enough work and dedication, he could bed any woman, single or married. So far, he'd been almost exclusively single, but Ellie was gorgeous and thought he was an asshole. Corey wasn't going to hurt Will. By winning Ellie over, he would later convince her that they should stop for the sake of her love for Will. Remorse would make her agree, and they would cut their liaisons down to once or twice a year. Will never know about it, and he won't be hurt. To make sure of that, he'll coach Ellie. In the end, everyone wins. For several years, Corey pushed and prodded her. He would infuriate her at times, then apologize for hurting one of her friends. Elle would berate him and complain about him to Will. "Your partner is such an asshole!" she yelled. Eventually, Corey groveled and won her over with his boyish smile and puppy dog eyes. He gave her small gifts, nothing inappropriate, but things he found out she liked. A certain kind of dark chocolate she loved, or a scarf that one of her friends said she liked. He always accompanied them with a sheepish, "I'm bad, but please love me," look that made her feel good in the end. He always knew he was back with her when she hugged him and said, "I still hate your damn guts, but you can be so sweet when you want to be." It was in late January of this year that he had his breakthrough. Shortly before Christmas, he had met, dated, and gone to bed with Joe, Ellie's co-worker at the stable. On the 23rd of January, he was at Will and Ellie's house for a Sunday night soccer game. Corey and Will were drinking beer in Will's room while watching the NFC and AFC championship games. During the second quarter of the AFC game, Allie's phone rang. She grabbed the phone and answered it, leaving the room. Corey and Will heard the first few phrases of her conversation. "Hey, Joe. What's up, girl?" "What? No, you can't be serious. He didn't do it." "Joe, try to calm down and tell me what happened." Silence for about 2 minutes. Then, they heard a chair on the kitchen table being pushed with such force that it fell over and the stomping of feet down the hallway. "That goddamn bastard, I'm gonna kick his ass." Slap. Will looked at Corey, realizing what had happened. "Really, brother? You broke another heart?" "I'm sorry, Will. I know things are hard for you and Ellie, but Joe just wasn't for me and I couldn't leave her." "Corey, when the hell are you gonna grow up?" "Why don't you wait until you realize if you really care about him?" "God damn it, stay away from my wife's friends. She'll yell at you for 10 or 20 minutes, but then she'll bitch at me for at least a week." "Man, I'm sorry, but I gotta listen to you and pull my head out of my ass. One of these days, she might just shoot me." "Well, I don't own a gun, but I can't promise she won't buy one." "Shit!" He intercepted the ball again. A few minutes later, Ellie popped out of the bedroom and ran into Corey. You're such a shit. You're such a damn shit, Parker. He realized things were totally bad when she started using his last name. I'm sorry, Ella. Jo is a nice girl, but She didn't let him finish. Screw you, Corey. Jo isn't just a nice girl. She's one of my best friends. I told you when I introduced you to her to stay away from her. I know, Al. Shut up, Corey! Ellie yelled, driving herself into a frenzy. She picked up a pillow from the couch and started pounding him with it. She cried, Every time you just use them and then toss them aside. Why, Corey? What the hell are you getting at that you can't just be a decent guy for a wonderful woman like Jo? Corey managed to get up and move around the couch, trying to increase the distance between himself and his abuser. It was only a pillow, but it was a strong one, and the blows came with force. She stopped for a moment to catch her breath, at which point Corey grabbed his jacket and hurriedly retreated to the front door. You're acting crazy, Ellie. I'm sorry I hurt Jo, but I think I'd better get out of here and let you cool off. Maybe we can talk when you've calmed down. With those words, he was almost out the door. Calm down? Calm down, she muttered, following close behind him. You have fun with my friends, you freak, and you tell me to calm down? She threw a pillow as he closed the door to dodge her final onslaught. But Ellie was so flustered that she opened the door and followed him down the sidewalk. Will sat on the couch, deciding that avoiding this battle was the better part of valor. I'm not done with you yet, Corey Parker. Get your sorry ass back here, Ellie yelled, following him to his car. Corey had parked in front of the house, not in the driveway, and the hedge blocked the view of anyone looking out of the house to the street. They were alone. Corey raised his hands in a sign of surrender. Okay, Elle, wait a minute, he said in a calmer voice. First of all, it's about 28 degrees outside and you're barefoot and only wearing a t-shirt. You better get back inside before you get cold. He didn't want her to get sick from being out in the cold, but he secretly enjoyed the sight the cold made of her nipples. Her teeth were chattering, but she wasn't going to stop. Screw this, Parker. Then she burst into tears again. Why, Corey? Please tell me why. You shouldn't be such a jerk to my friends, or any woman for that matter. What is going on with you? This was the moment he'd been planning for so long, and now it had come. He made a puppy face and replied, Do you really want to know, Ellie? Are you sure you want me to tell you? Once I do, there's no going back. Ellie was a little surprised at his vulnerability. She'd always thought he was superficial, but in an instant he'd shown her a different side, an intriguing one. Yes, Corey, she said more calmly. Please tell me. Because of you, Ellie, I can't stay with either of them. I know you're married. Hell, you're married to my best friend. But every time I'm with another woman, all I see is your face. Your face is the only face I want to see. I'm sorry, Ellie, but I'm crazy about you and all I want is to be with you. But Corey, we can't. I mean, I'm flattered and all. And deep down I care about you, but I can't. We can't. There's a fine line between anger and passion. She didn't realize it at the time, but Corey was going to cross that line, and she willingly agreed. He didn't let her finish her thoughts. He kissed her. He knew the moment of truth had arrived. She would either punch him in the face and go inside, and the dance would be lost, or she would respond. Oh shit, what have I done? Ellie said in a barely audible whisper. Corey, please. I can't do this, not here and not now. What she didn't say was even more telling. She didn't say never. Corey realized he had gone as far as he could go at this point. Ellie, I'm not going to say I'm sorry, I'm not. I don't want to hurt Will, but you're an amazing woman. I have to go now, but promise me that at the end of this week we can get together and talk things out. We'll just talk at the coffee shop. Nothing more, I promise. I don't know, Corey, maybe, she whispered. Go inside, Ellie. It's so cold in here, and Will be out in 10 seconds if you don't come back. He then got into the car, and she hid in the house, brushing her hair and adjusting her t-shirt, trying not to give any indication of herself. When she entered the house, Will was standing by the table with a nervous expression on his face. I'm sorry, Ella. I know he can be such a jerk. Maybe I should think about getting out of the business and doing something else. Something that won't involve Corey. My husband is so loving and kind, she thought to herself. No, baby, I'm just upset. I'm going to take a hot bath and have a glass of wine. Let me relax for a while and then come upstairs and give me a hug, please. Will was loving, kind, and completely oblivious to the fact that his world had just changed drastically for the worse. He had always trusted her. He had never had any reason to doubt her love or devotion to him. Sure, baby, just relax and take it easy. Tell me when you're ready and I'll come up. Ellie took a long bath. Corey came home, took a hot shower, and collapsed on the bed. She then called for her unknown cuckold to come upstairs and comfort her. 2 days later, at 10:30 a.m., Corey and Allie sat across from each other at a local coffee shop. In the morning, Allie told Will that she was going to talk to Corey more calmly, but very directly. She needs to clear the air, she told her husband. She hadn't decided what she was going to do yet. It was all confusing, but she knew she had to tell Will. If he happened to find out that they were getting together without him, he would regard it with mild suspicion. Corey, this can't be happening, Ellie began. He could tell she wasn't convinced. Allie, I'm never going to force you to do anything, but I sensed your reaction Sunday night. I know, Corey, something clicked in me and I was pulled there. But I love Will and I can't. I don't want to hurt him with lies and cheating. You have to understand that. I don't intend to hurt my friend Ellie, but that's not the same as deciding not to be with you. This could be our secret. You know me, I'm not the marrying kind. No matter how great you are, I'm not going to try to steal you away from him. I don't think I could, even if I wanted to. But don't you want to enjoy this moment together? Don't you want to let yourself go and use our lust for the amazing pleasure it can bring? But Will, we can have it and make sure Will doesn't find out anything. We both know it won't last. A strong flame goes out the fastest. A few scattered months, maybe a year, and it'll be over. But then we'll have lifelong memories of an impressive bond with an amazing man. He felt her coming to her senses. I know it would be amazing, Corey, but how can we be sure it won't blow up and ruin my marriage to the man I want to spend the rest of my life with? People get caught because they are stupid and careless. Since we are neither, I'm sure we can make sure no one gets hurt. No, I don't think so, was all she said, briskly getting up and walking out of the cafe. Walking to her car, she was determined, it's not going to happen. Corey wasn't the least bit embarrassed by this. He knew she had crossed the line and there was no going back. It might take some time, but he would help her take the next few steps. He sat for a while pondering, then grabbed a coffee for Will and headed to the office to lie that Ellie had read him the riot act. The next steps followed a week later. Will needed to drive to Winston-Salem to meet with a couple of technicians they were recruiting from Wake Forest. Knowing she had an evening free, she rode for an hour after work and came home, chilled from the early February temperature. After a shower, she threw on a warm terry cloth robe and headed downstairs to sit by the fireplace enjoying some wine. Will called to let her know that everything was going well and he would be home by lunch the next day. 10 minutes later, there was a light knock on the back door. Startled, Ellie turned around and looked. There stood the devil incarnate, Corey Parker, smiling and holding a 2012 Camus 40th anniversary cab convertible. Something clicked, and without thinking, she swung the door open and threw herself into his arms. There was no one outside on such a cold February night. Corey borrowed one of Will's jackets and put on his cap in case anyone saw him. No one saw. Corey picked her up in his arms, slung her over his shoulder, and carried her upstairs to the Bentons' marital bed. She glared back at him. What are you going to do about Parker, you bastard? I think you should leave right now. You're not man enough for me. You might flash your eyes at my friends and they'll melt, but not at me. I'm not impressed. Get out of my bedroom. In no time, she didn't realize how herself they were at it. Finally, after about 2 hours and another shower, they embraced each other and drifted into slumber. Before drowsiness overtook her, Ellie finally remembered Will. Corey had thoughtfully set the alarm on his phone for 6:30 a.m. He let her sleep in while making coffee and summarizing. They would have to be very careful in the coming months. He was beginning to question whether a brief interlude with her would be enough. Ellie was an incredible woman and lover. She gave him everything he could handle and more. He loved that at times she was submissive and let him take the lead. But she also pushed him like no other woman had ever pushed him, and that thrilled him. Ellie woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and to Corey looking at her with a smile. She got up and headed for the bathroom. A few minutes later, they were sitting side by side, sipping coffee and talking quietly. After finishing their cup, they went to the kitchen for more. 2 hours later, the sheets were washed. Corey was in the office. Will had just gotten into his car, heading for home and his loving wife. The word cheater had never crossed her mind. Like 99.9% of people, she considered herself a basically good person. Maybe what she was doing was wrong, but she didn't allow herself to consider it wrong. I love Will and I will never stop, she thought to herself. She didn't question how acceptable love, fidelity, and adultery with her husband's business partner was. That's the thing, you can't think about betrayal too much. If you think about it, you'll see holes in your arguments and realize you've morally stumbled. So Allie, like so many others, just decided that everything would be okay and moved on with her life. For the next 8 months, Corey and Allie spent at least one day a week together, in bed, in the car, on the couch, moonlighting in the park, and even in a remote corner of the giant parking lot at Lowe's Motor Speedway. They never met in the same place more than once, and always at a time when their antics would have been nearly impossible to detect. Hotels were used about every third meeting. Corey would pick a city close enough that it could be charged as a business expense. Ellie, for her part, would tell Will that she needed to look at a horse or investigate a competitor's stable. Following Corey's admonition, Ellie continued to love her husband as she had before. It wasn't hard for her, as she genuinely liked him in so many ways. Will just trusted the hell out of both of them. He'd never suspected anything. When Will had told Corey in August that he planned to surprise Allie with a Caribbean cruise in September for their 10th wedding anniversary, Corey had decided that he would try to spend a weekend with Allie a week or two before. He knew that Ellie was starting to worry that they were out of luck. As Corey had suspected, he hadn't lost interest in her, but he was also determined not to let his girlfriend find out about his betrayal. Perhaps this would be the last fling. Perhaps. Recently, back in Charleston. Dinner can be left for a few minutes, she whispered in his ear. Her cell phone rang, but she ignored it, which turned out to be one of the biggest mistakes of her life, because every cheater eventually gives up at some point. A few minutes later, 3 hours north of Charleston, a blissfully ignorant Will Benton was enjoying a Chinese meal when his cell phone rang. The area code was 843. Thanks to his business, Will knew a lot of codes, especially in the southeast. Charleston? He wondered to himself. He didn't get any calls from customers, and he didn't remember any close friends in the area. Hello. Hi, this is Gemma Hartnell. I'm trying to reach Ellie Benton. Well, you're getting close. This is her husband, Will. Is there anything I can help you with? I'm sorry to bother you on vacation, Mr. Benton, but Mrs. Benton was riding Kiowa with us today, and her wallet must have fallen out of her purse when she left. I guess she hadn't discovered it yet, or she would have come back for it. Anyway, we had her cell phone number that she had booked, but she didn't answer. It was the only number I could find in her wallet, so I decided to give it a try. I'm so glad I got through to you. Before she could continue, Will interrupted her. You told Ellie Benton, right? Yes. Could you confirm her address on her driver's license? Sure, give me a second. 1810 Falling Leaf Drive. That's our address, but there must be some mistake here. Ellie is at a horse show this weekend in Lexington, Kentucky. Will felt his palms begin to sweat. I'm sorry, sir, the young woman on the other end of the line replied. Gemma was starting to get nervous too, not realizing what she had gotten herself into, but wanting to get out as soon as possible. If you speak to her, would you please tell her that her wallet is in our possession at Seabrook Stables? Yes, sorry, Will stammered, trying to make sense of the call. I'll be sure to tell her. I think she's coming by to pick him up tonight or tomorrow. Hanging up the phone, Will walked over to his laptop and opened it to the itinerary Ellie had given him. She had left early in the morning and was due home Sunday night. At the top of the page, he read, Champagne Races, Lexington, Kentucky, the 10th of September 12th. It was a weekend, and from the looks of it, Ellie wasn't there. What was she doing in Charleston or on Kiowa Island? He pondered aloud, not addressing anyone in particular. Why did she lie to me about it? There must be some reasonable explanation. Will was a clever and methodical fellow. He sat down and forced himself to run through every possible scenario. First, she could plan a surprise for the two of them later in the fall, but it could all be done with a laptop. Second, She couldn't set something up for their anniversary since he'd explicitly hinted he was planning a surprise. Third, would there really be a show in Charleston this weekend too? Had she just changed her plans at the last minute and not told him because she didn't want him to think she was flighty? He quickly looked through the schedule on the Charleston Visitors website, looking for anything even remotely horse-related. Nothing. Fourth, something with the sorority sisters she didn't want to tell him about? But why? He wouldn't care if she had a girls' weekend away. None of these or several other ideas made sense. Then he wrote down the last one he didn't want to consider, but he had no choice. First, was she having an affair? A lump immediately rose in his throat and a knot in his stomach. There didn't seem to be any other reasonable explanation. He felt like he'd married the most amazing woman in the world. A beautiful woman, intelligent and gifted, a woman he planned to spend his entire life with, a faithful woman. What should he do? He needed to think and make sense of the situation, but he also needed to pull himself together. He needed to calm down, so he turned to the only name he thought could help him. Corey. He started to press speed dial button #2, but stopped suddenly. Oh shit, he thought, starting to put together the pieces he desperately hoped wouldn't match. Corey's gone to Florida to visit his relatives for the weekend. Right? He flipped through his list until he settled on Marty Parker and dialed the call sign on his cell phone. Will, to what do I owe this honor? I hope you and my son are still fighting in peace. Hey Marty, I'm trying to reach Corey. His phone goes to voicemail, he lied. But he told me he's visiting you and Vera this weekend. Nothing urgent, just a quick question. Is he around? I think you're wrong, Will, Marty replied. Corey told me he'll be in Hilton Head this weekend with a couple of frat buddies. Do you want me to try to get in touch with him? Will tried to keep his cool. Don't worry, Marty, I probably have the whole weekend scheduled. I left him a message, I'm sure he'll call me back. Love, Faith, he barely had time to say before he hung up. This can't be happening, Will tried desperately to reason. Not his best friend and not his wife. Please let it not be true. He sat like that for about an hour, trying to breathe normally and think logically. What should he do? Jump on an airplane, try to find them and face them? That was crazy. There was no way he could know where they were staying if they were together. Ignore it until Sunday night and demand an explanation when Ellie got home? That wouldn't work, because if she was lying, she'd cover her tracks and keep lying. He was sure she'd probably have the bill from the hotel in Lexington to prove it. Ellie wasn't stupid. An hour later, he was no closer to figuring it out, so he typed North Carolina divorce laws into Google. North Carolina was a no-fault divorce state, and they had no children, so the alimony issue fell away. However, alimony is a different issue. Would she want half of his 50% stake in the company? If so, she and Corey would own the majority and they could force him out. Was that really her plan? And what about a fault-based divorce? In Chapter 51:6, where the reasons for divorce are bolded, there were 2 words. Adultery. But she had a huge burden of proof, and if she cheated on him with Corey, all he would have was a phone call from a stable employee. Only one thing was clear to him. If Ellie and Corey were having an affair, he was finished. He could refuse the money. He didn't care that much about it anyway. He was a gifted guy and had helped build a very successful company. He could get a well-paying technical job at any firm, or perhaps hang his own. Will also knew he couldn't play detective for the next few months. He also couldn't pretend to be a loving husband during that time, while some private investigator would be doing the digging. It was late Friday night when he finally gave up and decided that the law of diminishing returns was in effect. He was running in circles. He took 3 Tylenol PM pills, set his alarm for 8 a.m. and went to bed. 30 minutes and many tears later, the medication started to take effect. It was past midnight in Charleston when Corey and Ellie sat on the porch after an amazing dinner, a moonlit walk on the beach. When they returned from their walk, Ellie had drawn a bath in a deep antique clawfoot tub and told her lover to wait patiently for her on the double bed. An hour later, they were sitting on the porch talking quietly. What are we doing, Corey? What do you mean? It seems to me that you're well aware of what we've been up to. You're not so smart, she replied, punching him on the shoulder. Why are we doing this? We've been together for over 8 months. You have more girls than you want, and I have a husband I love. The last word stuck in her throat. She felt that she did love her husband deeply, but how could she say it with an honest face, given where she was and what she was doing? Corey knew better than to tease her about her love for Will. Truth be told, he felt a twinge of guilt when she said his name. He'd known him almost 7 years longer than he'd known her. They spent 8 to 10 hours each day in each other's office, planning, revising, tweaking, creating, and developing. Corey had no siblings, so Will was the closest sibling to him. I don't know, Ellie. I just can't take my thoughts and hands off of you. I love Will too, but you're memorable to me. Maybe you just can't get over the fact that Will has something you don't. Maybe? We have this weekend and Will and I are going on a cruise on Tuesday. He can never ever suspect us. But I want to live with Will as my husband and hopefully soon the father of my children. I hope you're not saying this weekend is our last outing together? I'm not sure, but no, I don't think I'm saying that. It's a little late to tell me I don't have a big head. At precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, Will Benton rose from bed. Slightly staggered from an overabundance of sleeping pills, he forced himself to take a cold shower and dispel the fog. He brewed some coffee and finalized the plan he'd developed over the last half hour. 5 minutes later, he was already dialing the phone number of Sterling's after-hours private investigation service out of Charleston, California. The customer service operator recorded his information and promised that one of their highly trained professionals would call him back in the next 30 minutes. Private investigators only eat what they kill, so the callback came in less than 10. Mr. Benton, this is Amanda Cunningham. How can I help you? Will laid it out point by point, which he wrote down. First, his wife, Ellie Benton, said she was going to Lexington for the weekend, but had somehow dropped her purse in the stables on Kiowa Island. Second, he feared she was there with her lover, business partner Corey Parker. Third, if they were there, he had no idea where they were staying, but assumed a private home or cottage, perhaps in a remote location to maintain secrecy. Fourth, they would likely be there until tomorrow afternoon, so time was running out. He needed information and fast. Fifth, he needed hard evidence either way, including photos, videos, audio recordings, etc. Sixth, cost didn't matter. Amanda chuckled quietly upon hearing the last remark. Don't worry, Mr. Benton. Once we receive your 50% deposit, our team will find them, if they are here, and see what they are up to. We don't just call ourselves highly trained professionals to try to attract business. Our small firm of 5 has over 3 decades of experience in surveillance, spycraft, and covert operations. I'll have their location within the hour. They chatted for another 15 minutes as Will wanted to know a little more before shelling out the $6,000 down payment. Her answers were accurate and convincing. Will took her account information and made a wire transfer. They agreed that she would call him no later than noon with an update. About that time, Ellie busied herself listening to her voicemail left the night before. She also realized that she had forgotten to call Will to see how he was doing. She did so from the Mustang while Corey was driving her back to Kiowa to get her wallet. Her call went to voicemail, and she left Will a very loving and very dishonest message about horses and a miserable breakfast at the North Lexington Courtyard Marriott Hotel. She sincerely assured him that she would enjoy everything he had planned for the following week in honor of their 10th anniversary. When they arrived in Seabrook, she ran into the office and pulled out her wallet. Gemma wasn't working that morning and so didn't recognize Will's call. They decided to go shopping on King Street and have a lunch of shrimp and grits at slightly north of Broad. Snob for locals. While Will gave Amanda and her team time to work, he contacted Ed Simmons, a longtime friend of his father's and a prominent attorney. Ed was getting ready to play at the Cedarwood Golf and Country Club when he got the call. He decided to answer it. After a 5-minute conversation, he apologized to his playing partners, gave his caddy the lightest tip of $100, and headed straight for the house at 1810 Falling Leaf Drive. Ed and Will spent 90 minutes reviewing the initial information to determine Will's best course of action once the information came back. Ed correctly surmised that Will's wife was cheating with someone, possibly Corey. At 11:57, Will's cell phone rang. On the other end was Amanda. She summarized what they had learned so far. First, Ellie was definitely in town and had ridden at Seabrook yesterday. She had been there earlier in the morning with a man in a red Mustang convertible who had reached for her wallet. The man fit the description of Mr. Corey Parker. Second, Mr. Parker rented the car from National Car Rental and listed as his local address a single cottage on the far north end of Folly Island, somewhat separated from the other houses and quite secluded. Third, the couple then spent 2 hours shopping downtown on King Street. 10 minutes ago, they had been sitting in the Snob restaurant ordering lunch. She was sure it was shrimp and grits, but she wasn't sure. Fourth, while they were gone, the cottage had surveillance equipment and recording devices set up. "How the hell did you find all this out so quickly?" exclaimed Will. Before Amanda could respond, Ed stepped into the conversation. "Miss Cunningham, this is Ed Simmons, Mr. Benton's attorney." "Mrs. Cunningham, but call me Amanda, Mr. Simmons." "My apologies, Amanda, call me Ed." "Unfortunately, you and I will be speaking several times in the coming weeks, so I would like to ask you to follow some protocols to help my client deal with this unfortunate set of circumstances. Do you mind if I record this conversation?" "Yes, of course." "Before I do, would you mind transferring my client's down payment?" "I have the account information, and I've already sent you the deposit. My firm is now officially taking over your services on behalf of my client. All invoices should be sent to me at the email address I will give you." "Yes, I understand. One of my assistants is reviewing that page now, and we will reimburse Mr. Benton immediately." "Great, thank you. Now here's what I need you and your team to do. For the next 30 minutes, Will listened with rapt attention as these two highly trained professionals laid out the plan of attack. He was amazed at the way they interacted. Amanda listened attentively and only entered the conversation when she thought she had an idea on how best to carry out what Ed had in mind. Ed, for his part, was willing to listen to other ideas and accepted several of her suggestions. "Thank you, Amanda," Ed said finally. "I'll let you get back to work, as you have a lot to do and very little time to do it." "Understood," Amanda replied, disconnecting. "Will, I need to know your goal. Do you want to pursue reconciliation or divorce? I wouldn't want to put you on such a tight deadline. Normally, I always advise a client to take time and think things through, but I'm not sure you can afford that luxury right now. It's okay if the plan changes along the way, but I need to know what direction to take next." Will didn't like rash behavior, but that didn't seem to make sense. "I loved her with all my heart and believed she would return that love to me. She betrayed me in our marriage. My partner did the same thing to me in our business. This is not a crazy drunken moment at a company holiday party. This is willful infidelity, and I can't get over it. This may not be the first time they've been together. Since she intentionally broke her vows and my partner is just as callously abusing our partnership, I want them both out of my life as soon as possible. Nothing I can or will come up with can encourage me to stay married to her or continue to do business with him. If it costs me every penny, so be it, but I want them out of my life, and I want them to feel the pain I feel today." As he spoke, tears appeared in his eyes. Ed reached across the table and put his arm around his shoulders in reassurance. "Okay, Will, if we hear from Amanda and the team what we think, here's what you're going to do." By Sunday afternoon, Ellie was very concerned. She had called Will 5 times. 3 times on Saturday and twice on Sunday morning. All she got in response was a polite but curt text reply. "Busy with crisis, talk to you Sunday night. Enjoy Lexington." She showed the message to Corey and asked him to call Will to find out what was going on. She assumed it was a business problem, but in the back of her mind she wondered, he can't know, can he? "How can I call him, Ellie?" asked Corey. "He hasn't contacted me to let me know about any problems in the office. If I call, what do I say?" "Hi, Will. Ellie and I are in Charleston, but she thinks we're having problems at work, so she asked me to contact you." "Damn, you're right. I'm not thinking straight," his lover replied. "It must be work. There's no way he could have guessed that." "You told him you're visiting your folks this weekend, so maybe he just doesn't want to interrupt that." "Yeah, I guess he does," Corey replied, not really convinced. After showering before heading to the airport, they tried to make love, but Corey realized that Ellis's attention was focused on Charlotte and didn't push it. 3 minutes after they pulled away from the cottage, an AT&T van pulled up. 2 workers entered the house to disassemble and reassemble their equipment. 30 minutes later, Amanda and her 2 assistants were going through tapes and recordings. An hour later, one of the men remarked, "Damn, what stamina they have!" Corey dropped Ellie off at the front desk and headed to return the rental car. At that moment, his cell phone rang. It was his father. "What's up, Dad?" "Hey, son, just checking in to see how you're doing. Hope it's fun in Hilton Head." "Yep, really not hitting the ball very aptly, but we played some golf and had some great seafood." "Are you and Mom okay?" "Sure. Listen, son, I won't keep you, but Friday night I got a call from Will looking for you. For some reason, he thought you were coming to visit us for the weekend. I reminded him you were at HH, but that surprised me because he doesn't make mistakes like that. Is he okay?" Corey felt his stomach roll up to his throat and tried desperately to speak normally. "He's had a lot on his mind lately, Dad. I think he and Ellie want to start a family, and he's a little worried about being a father. I'm sure he just got the dates mixed up. I'm still coming up in 3 weeks for the weekend." His answer seemed to convince his father. They chatted for a couple more minutes and then hung up. Corey decided not to tell Ellie. "It's probably nothing, and I don't want to upset her before the flight home." They flew separately to back up, and their flights were on time. Since Ellie only had carry-on luggage, she went straight to her car in the long-term parking lot and drove home. She was still worked up, but after calming down, she regained her composure as she drove 25 minutes from the airport. Traffic was heavy on Sunday night, so she made it on time. She couldn't wait to see Will and make sure her charade wasn't solved. She would be a tired wife from the long weekend, but so happy to see her husband. She would shower and jump on his bones. As it turned out, she didn't have to pretend, nor did she get a chance to jump on his bones. When she pulled into the driveway and pressed the button for the remote that opened the garage door, she got her first clue, though she didn't pay attention to it. The remote wasn't working. "Damn dead battery," she thought. Then she noticed that the house was dark. Only the porch light was on. She headed toward the front door with her roller bag. As she approached, she saw an envelope taped to the front door with her name printed on it. She slipped it under her arm and inserted the key into the lock. She tried several times to open the door, but the key wouldn't work. A shiver began to hit her. She let go of the bag and sat down in one of the Adirondack chairs on the front porch. She tore open the note and burst into tears a moment later. "Mrs. Benton. In this note, I inform you that your husband, Will Benton, has engaged my services as an attorney. It has come to my client's attention that you are having an adulterous and illicit affair with his business partner, Corey Parker. It has come to his attention that you have not been in Lexington, Kentucky, but have been in Charleston, South Carolina, with your lover, the aforementioned Mr. Parker, for the past several days." And so on. First, through my office, Mr. Benton will provide evidence that he knows of your treachery toward him and your marriage to Mr. Parker. Second, Mr. Benton has changed the locks on his residence and asks that you find another place to live as soon as possible. As you will recall, the mortgage is in his name only, so you have no legal right to enter the house without his permission. Third, also please do not attempt to contact my client. He will be contacting you through my office within the next week for an initial separation and divorce conversation. Fourth, Mr. Benton will give you a fair opportunity to enter the home under appropriate supervision and retrieve your personal belongings as early as tomorrow morning. Again, I ask that you contact me, not Mr. Benton, to make these arrangements. Fifth, I recommend that you contact an attorney regarding this matter. When you do, please provide them with my name and contact information. Sixth, Mr. Benton has assured me that there are sufficient funds in your joint account to cover any immediate expenses, such as living expenses, should you need it. Please use your Bank of America debit card as all joint credit cards have been paid off and canceled. He asked me to tell you that it may be in your best financial interest to ask Mr. Parker if you can stay with him. Sincerely, Edward M. Simmons, Attorney at Law, Simmons, Simmons, and Wyckoff. It took Ellie a few minutes to gather her thoughts. She began trying to contact Will on the phone, either ignoring or forgetting the instructions she had just read. 5 minutes later, she received a message from Ed Simmons. Mrs. Benton, I must insist that you respect my client's wishes not to attempt to contact him directly. Ellie sat up and stared at the message on the screen. Across town, Corey Parker's keys worked in his apartment, but he was also the recipient of a note from Simmons, Simmons, and Wyckoff. To Mr. Corey Parker. From Edward Simmons, Attorney at Law, Simmons, Simmons, and Wyckoff. It has come to the attention of my client, your business partner, Mr. William J. Benton, that you engaged in an illicit relationship with his wife, resulting in her being found guilty. In addition, during the initial financial audit conducted by Randolph Michaels, CPA, CFI, MAF, it came to my client's attention that company funds had been fraudulently used to fund at least 8 affairs between you and Mrs. Eleanor Benton. To avoid both criminal and civil prosecution, my client, Mr. Benton, would like to discuss terminating the partnership and purchasing your 50% interest in the company. You should contact a lawyer and financial advisor regarding this matter. Please do not attempt to contact my client directly. Please direct all desired communications to me at eds@ssw.com. Any violation of this requirement will be considered a breach of the terms set forth in paragraph 3 above and will result in immediate legal and civil action against you. Corey Parker began to curse himself. Damn, how many times have I taken Ellie out of the game and attributed it to client business entertainment? Then he realized that he had already electronically sent about $1,000 from this past weekend to their accountant for reimbursement. He knew Will rarely scrutinized expenses line by line, and Diane's accountant had no reason to suspect him of fraud. The annual independent audit had been completed 2 weeks ago, and they had found no discrepancies. He figured that since it was such a small amount of money involved, no one would notice. The total amount couldn't have been more than a few $1,000s, but there was definitely a pattern that a son of a bitch like Michaels could have detected. Screw me. He spent the rest of the night sipping bourbon and trying to figure out how to start circling his proverbial wagons. He was more successful with the bourbon than figuring out how to proceed. Ellie called and texted him over a dozen times during the evening. He ignored them all. Damn, bitch, I got enough problems of my own. Deal with your shit and leave me alone, he thought. How quickly the shaky foundation of a relationship built on lust crumbles. Ellie sat on the porch of her house, or former porch depending on how one perceived the results, numb with shock. Somehow her husband knew far more than she trusted him to know. Her lover, she now used that term loosely, ignored her calls and texts. I guess I know where I stand with him, that bastard. If Ellie had thought about it for once, she would have realized that Corey might be good at business and a good friend at all times, but he would never risk himself for her. I betrayed a guy who's willing to die for me for an asshole who doesn't care about me. The tears flowed again. Meanwhile, in the guest house by the heated pool at Ed Simmons' residence, Will and Ed were putting the finishing touches on the house, contemplating the next steps. Looking around, Will realized he had hired the right person. Without a doubt, Ed Simmons, an attorney, was a master of his craft. He had enlisted another senior partner, 2 junior partners, and a paralegal on Sunday night to attend the war council. The thought crossed Will's mind, this is going to cost me a lot of money. However, this revelation made him smile. Especially for that rogue bitch. Ed assured Will that both Ellie and Corey would be recovering and hiring lawyers by tomorrow. He knew that the first few salvos would be either denial, which would be easily handled by the small mountain of evidence they had already obtained, or attempts to lower the price to limit the damage and save their reputations. He advised Will to go about his usual business and be patient. I doubt I'll have anything for you until the middle of the week, so go to work, keep your head down, don't talk to strangers. And no matter what, never take candy from anyone who drives around in questionable vans. Simmons laughed heartily at his own joke, put his arm around Will's shoulders and said, Don't worry, son. You're in the loving arms of Simmons and Wyckoff? Will wasn't sure if he could go home or not. He was afraid Ellie would stubbornly sit on the porch and wait for him in ambush. Things aren't what they seem. It didn't mean anything, just sex. Please, baby, I'm sure we can work this out. I only love you. Ed was 2 steps ahead of him. He spoke on his cell phone for a moment, then turned to his new favorite customer and grinned. One of my guys just walked by and suggested she leave the premises as she was trespassing. She tried to be indignant. I'm waiting for my husband at my house. Then he started laughing. My boyfriend suggested that if it was her house, she should enter it with her key, at which point she became enraged. He pretended to call the police to report a potentially violent intruder, while speaking loud enough for her to hear him. She left quickly. Will smiled, but Ed noticed the smile was sad. Stupid bitch, he thought. For the next few days, Will did everything he was told, following the lawyer's instructions exactly. By Tuesday afternoon, He had changed his cell phone number because there was no way Ellie could take it that he had no desire to talk to her. The situation at the office was complicated. On the advice of his attorney, Corey decided to work from home. You don't want to be seen as intrusive or refusing business, like admitting your partner is right, he was advised. Will valued honesty. He told the small staff that he and Corey had some differences that were being worked out. For the time being, they should treat him as a partner. He assured everyone that the difficulties would be short-lived and things would be resolved soon. Whether he believed what he was saying or not remained to be seen. Ellie continued to work at the stables, but became so distracted that her employer asked what was wrong. She explained that something wasn't going well between her and Will, without revealing any details. Her boss, Stephanie, hugged her and advised her to hang in there. Ellie was also having trouble finding a competent lawyer. Lawyers want to know all the facts up front. Because it became clear after she told the whole truth that there was little hope for any significant payout, her first two attorneys turned her down. She eventually turned to an ambulance chaser named Seth Moore. He assured her that he had handled bigger cases than this and would get a lot of money from the settlement. He wanted her to have enough money to give him a retainer that would cover this month's office rent and still have a little left over for a night at his favorite strip bar. Maybe if she's desperate in a few weeks, she'll sleep with me in exchange for services rendered? Neither Mr. Moore nor Corey's lawyer, James Abernathy, had the time. Ed Simmons was a successful trial lawyer with an impeccable reputation. He was deeply connected to the powerful in Charlotte's legal circles. He pushed for a speedy hearing as soon as Ellie received the subpoena 2 days after returning home. Abernathy was a tougher nut to crack than Ellie's incompetent lawyer, but even he realized he wasn't playing to win. He realized that dragging the case out for months, a year or two, was beyond his client's means. By the end of the second week, he advised his client to offer to sell his part of the business at a favorable price that would allow Corey time to get back on his feet and pay his legal fees. Corey authorized Abernathy to make an offer to sell at 80 cents on the dollar. Simmons received the offer to sell and advised Will to offer 10 cents on the dollar. We'll probably end up settling somewhere around 30. I know Abernathy well, and even though he sees the situation for what it is, he'll still negotiate hard. Will wanted Corey to feel his pain. 10 cents on the dollar would bring his former friend back to square one financially. That would be fair. But Will also knew he had to listen to his lawyer. If they got 30 cents on the dollar, it would certainly hit Corey hard. He would leave the rest to fate or to a later date, whichever came first. 3 days later, Ed, true to his word, made a deal on Will's behalf. 28 cents on the dollar. He relayed to Will over the phone. Not as much as you'd hoped, but still, that's a pretty big win for you. Will thanked him. Now Ed spoke of real pain. Will, you're going to have to sit down with Ellie and talk. The judge will want to know what you've done to reach out and talk to her, even if you intend to divorce. It's always better to have answers before the judge asks you questions. We drew the Honorable Kim Landis in our divorce petition. It could have been better, it could have been much worse, so overall it's fine. However, she is committed to trying to mend relationships, so she will have questions about counseling. Perhaps she will even demand it. I won't bore you with the details right now, but I will say that it's time to talk. I'll make the arrangements. We'll start by having the attorney in the room, but then I think it would be wise for you to just sit and talk to her alone. Prove that you can have a calm and cordial conversation despite being deeply hurt. It will help us prove to you that you are a reasonable person. Will hung his head, realizing that Ed was right, but dreading this moment. All right, Ed. You're right. Let's set it up. Ed looked at his young client and felt sad. Ed Simmons was once young and had his heart broken by his first sweetheart. Ed had paid his way through college with an ROTC scholarship and was serving at the rank of first lieutenant when the first Gulf War broke out. He was attached to the 1st Infantry Division, mechanized, better known as the Big Red One. He served under Brigadier General Andrew C. Gainey, and they kicked each other's asses. At home, however, his love Becky decided not to wait for her man. Ed was devastated, but with the help of friends and family, he coped. He knew that Will would be okay in the long run. In truth, he knew he would be better off without his cheating wife, but now was not the time for that. Will would realize that in time. Now was the time to talk to him and let him know he wasn't alone. Ed might have been a harsh son of a bitch, but he had a big heart and it ached for his client. The meeting was set for mid-afternoon the following Friday. Ed wanted Will to have the weekend off so he could recover after a couple hours of hard work. Both parties agreed that they would spend the first 30 minutes or so with the attorney, and then Will and Ellie would be alone. Ellie and Seth Moore arrived on time. Seth was dressed in a surtout off the rack, probably from JCPenney. Ellie was dressed in a modest light blue sundress that came down below her knees and a maroon sweater. Her hair was gathered into a ponytail, and she wore Michael Kors sunglasses. Ed and Will stood as they entered the most private conference room at Simmons, and Wyckoff, which meant the other party would have to traverse several hallways and corridors. Ed wanted to make sure Moore understood what he was facing. He knew that Seth's office was 15 feet from his three-seater behind the desk from IKEA, where his assistant stripper Molly worked when he could afford to pay her. Will had always been in love with Ellie, and a lump rose in his throat at the sight of her now. Even after her betrayal, she was still beautiful in his eyes. He managed a polite smile, but he avoided looking at her in a way that could be perceived as love. "It's good to see you, Will," she said, looking at him intently, perhaps trying to see if there was any affection in his heart for her. Will nodded. "Ellie, thanks for coming." Ed mimed a poker face, but inwardly thought to himself, "Young man, don't let her see shit." "Shall we begin?" he said loudly, inviting everyone to sit down. "Yes, thank you," Seth cut in, perhaps deciding he wanted to build momentum in his direction. "My client has agreed to this meeting to find out what her husband is proposing as an attempt to save their marriage." Ed interrupted him by picking up a 6-inch thick folder from the end of his desk and held it out to opposing counsel. "What's this?" his colleague inquired. "I'm not sure we're ready to accept any documents today." "Counselor," Ed began, wanting to get rid of this prick as soon as possible. "This is approximately 50% of our file, indicating adultery and betrayal of marriage vows on the part of your client. To avoid redundancy, we haven't included anything repetitive. You will find notes and photographs of her activity in Charleston, South Carolina 3 weeks ago. In addition, we have witnesses from the hotel staff who will confirm that they saw your client with her lover, Mr. Corey Parker, who registered under false names as husband and wife. These liaisons took place over a period of 6 months. Our team of investigators have conducted a thorough background check to clearly articulate our claims. There is no ambiguity or heresy here, just cold, hard, verifiable data." Ellie shuddered as Ed explained the contents of the folder. The realization that this man had seen the photos made her clam up. He smiled politely. Together, under a moonlit sky or lying side by side in the candlelight and champagne, it was all so exotic and exciting. In the light of day, she began to realize that her choice had been a betrayal to a good and loving man. She struggled to keep her composure. Ed placed a second folder on the table. This one was much thinner, only 2 pages. "Counselor, this is my client's proposal to his wife for a divorce settlement." Then, looking directly at Ellie for extra convincing, he continued. "Personally, I think the terms are super generous. If it were up to me, I'd be willing to lay it all out to the judge so she could see the ugly truth of this deliberate betrayal on Mrs. Benton's part. Mr. Benton, however, being a man of character, persuaded me to make the offer." His experience and knowledge of legal litigation was paying off. Ellie looked defeated and Moore was clearly out of sorts. Ed knew they wouldn't come to an agreement today. The first hearing was still 2 weeks away, and there was always correspondence before appearing before the judge. Will's offer was harsh, given the circumstances, but more than fair, given that his wife had betrayed his love and trust. First, Will offered a lump sum of $75,000 in exchange for Ellie agreeing to become sole owner of the company from now and forever. She must agree to give up any futures claims. Second, she and Will split the proceeds from the sale of the house between them. It won't be too much since they've only lived in it for 5 years. Maybe $10,000 each. Third, Ellie would keep the car, but would have to start making payments on her own starting 1 month after the divorce. Fourth, Ellie could take any furniture in the house except the marital bed and an antique rocking chair set given by Will's grandmother when they married. Will intended to burn the bed in the backyard before leaving the house, which he eventually did. Fifth, Ellie will keep all of the jewelry Will bought for her, except for her engagement and wedding rings. These must be returned no later than the day of the divorce judgment. Sixth, Ellie must agree that the grounds for divorce are her adultery. There was an explanation on the page that laid out the agreement in more detail, but the main points were simple and straightforward. My client and I will take this under advisement and get back to you with our counteroffer by early next week. Miller replied, trying to sound as if his client held the moral high ground. I can tell you, however, that Mrs. Benton will not accept her husband's demand that her rings be returned to her. Stillman inwardly turned purple at the insolence of this chump, but, as usual, showed nothing on his face. When he spoke, however, he leaned across the table. Seth, you and I know that your client repeatedly and willfully broke her marriage vows with Corey Parker. She did so knowing full well that her actions could destroy my client's emotional well-being, as well as her ability to continue in business with her partner. That is why they orchestrated a grand cover-up to keep my client in the dark. Her behavior was cruel and heartless. If you want to play this out in front of Judge Landis, be my guest. I would welcome the opportunity to meet you face-to-face in her courtroom. I'll be frank with you. You have no case. Your client cheated and lied. We have mountains of evidence, and we will not savor it, but we will make it all public at trial if you try to do my client any more harm than she has already suffered. If I don't hear back from you by noon Tuesday, the offer will be considered null and void. I'll see you in court then. Moore huffed and puffed, but even a lawyer of his low level knew that his opponent held all the cards. This settlement would be a decent payday for him. He'd get $10,000 before taxes, which was more than he usually made in 2 months. If there's nothing else, Stillman said, getting up and buttoning his jacket, I suppose we should give the Bentons a few minutes for a private conversation. Moore stood up and extended his hand to Ed. We'll be in touch, was all he said. Ed shook his hand and then quickly headed to the men's room to wash his own. Will and Ellie were left alone. Ed advised his client to never speak first. As the injured party, he should insist by his silence that his ex-wife speak first. After the door closed behind the departing attorneys, there was an awkward silence for a moment. Will looked at Ellie. Ellie stared at the floor. Finally, she spoke. I have no excuses, Will. If I could take it all back, I would. My behavior has caused you great harm, and I will carry it with me for the rest of my life. To say I'm sorry or that it meant nothing would only be more disrespectful, but I want you to know how crushed I am when I think about how horribly I treated you. Believe what you want, Ellie, it doesn't matter to me, was all Will replied. She continued, Is there any hope for us, Will? Do you think with maybe some help, maybe counseling, we can get through this? I don't want a divorce. I never have. I'll do anything you ask, I just want us to be together. Will was trying hard not to explode. She'd had her cake and now she wanted to eat it. And it was all on him. Ellie, if the court orders counseling, I'll go. There was a flicker of hope in his wife's lying eyes. But know this, I don't have the slightest desire to be with you again. I have loved you. I gave you my heart, mind, and soul. And you repaid me by entertaining my former best friend. I don't even know what you are, Ellie, except that you're a whore. I will never touch you again, and I will never have children with you. You need my forgiveness, but you've ruined any hope of it. Ellie physically turned pale at his words. Will, do you hate me that much? Yes, Ellie, I do hate me today. The fact that you ask me questions like that shows your true nature, which is thinking only of yourself. But I'm planning for the long term, and my goal is to get over any emotions I have for you as soon as possible. My intention is not to care about you, not love or pity or anything else. My intention is to not think about you at all. You are not worth this pain. I've spent thousands of kisses and years of my life on you. I trusted you, Ellie, with everything, and you took it all away. You'll get on your feet or on your back, whatever you have to do to survive, but none of it will be with me. You'll have your horses and your stallion, that should be enough for you. Ellie went through a couple more options. Never speaking to Corey again, seeing a psychiatrist to understand why she made the choices she did. All of them went unanswered. After another 30 minutes, the conversation was over. Aren't you going to walk me to my car? One last moment together, she concluded. Walk Ellie or call Corey. Ask him to come get you and get back into bed with him. I'm done. Will stood up and started to leave, but she turned to him with one last comment. We had everything, Ellie, and you blew it. Over the next few days, Seth Moore, the attorney, did his best to get Simmons to concede on some of the demands in the divorce petition. He might as well have been talking to the wall in his office, as long as it did him some good. After the second conversation, Simmons stopped returning his calls. The Tuesday deadline was approaching, and Ellie knew she had little chance of getting more than Will was offering. On Monday, Corey did call her and offered to meet and comfort each other. Allie, desperate for any affection, agreed to meet him at his condo. She arrived at 8 p.m. and stayed the night. Corey didn't treat Ellie very well. It was pathetic, but that was what she had come to. Simmons had a man assigned to Corey's apartment who recorded her coming and going. When she left in the morning, it was obvious she had been badly mucked up. Her mascara and lipstick were smeared, and she looked like a whore leaving her house. The investigator smirked and returned the evidence to Simmons, and Wyckoff. Later that morning, when Ed was going over them with one of his assistants, he muttered, "No one could be that stupid." When Ellie returned to the studio apartment she'd rented month after month, she called Moore and told him to accept the divorce petition unchanged. He tried to argue with him. She hung up on him. The date for the first hearing came up. Judge Landis proved to be as tough as her reputation. She examined both sides of the case, asking pointed questions. Moore was like a man on a sinking life raft with sharks circling over him. Desperate is the only appropriate word to describe his case. Simmons was also questioned, but he was impeccably prepared. He gave plenty of answers before he was asked, and when he was asked, he had more than enough ammunition in his legal pistol. Landis also peppered both spouses with questions. Will was prepared masterfully. Ellie, not so much. At the end of the hearing, Judge Landis said, "Well, the evidence in this case seems overwhelming. I'll take a couple months to review them and perhaps get back to both attorneys with additional questions. If and when I call, I expect immediate answers. Is that clear to you?" Both attorneys answered in the affirmative. Landis always had a lot on her plate, so it was 3 months before she brought the parties back together. It is clear from the evidence that this is an egregious case of adultery. There are almost always two sides to every crumbling marriage, but damn it, Mrs. Benton, I can't see any plausible reason why you would leave your husband for Mr. Parker. As I understand it, the aforementioned sold his part of the business for pennies, thus confirming my opinion. Ordinarily, I would have scheduled a consultation, but I believe Mrs. Benton's cruel betrayal makes any reconciliation unattainable. Mrs. Benton, I can only most strongly urge you to think hard about your life choices and try to live a better life, on your own, in the future. Mr. Benton's petition for divorce and its terms are granted. The marriage is dissolved and the proceedings are adjourned. No slaps or cheers erupted from Will's side of the courtroom. Will and Ed shook hands grimly. Seth Moore hurriedly withdrew, leaving his client sitting at the table. Ellie rose and left the courtroom all alone. Will began a new life alone, suffering but knowing he was not alone. 5 months after the divorce agreement was finalized, Corey was leaving his apartment when he slipped and fell down 3 flights of stairs. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital. At the time of the accident, his blood alcohol level was 0.15, almost twice the legal limit. He did not remember anything about the accident. His insurance ran out while he was looking for a new job. Hospital bills had eaten up all of his savings. Will learned of the fall while driving through Smoky Mountain National Park. He smiled, thinking, nothing could have happened to a nicer guy. Police investigated and discovered that earlier that evening he had been entertaining his girlfriend, Miss Ellie Shriver. From the obvious traces, detectives discovered that they were lovers, and Corey was getting a little something on the side. Ellie was found guilty of aggravated assault and sentenced to 3 years in prison. It was not a pleasant experience. To this day, Corey walks with a severe limp. He works at a local junior college as a tech support worker. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.